The truth, it turns out, is not what fans have been telling themselves for years. What appears effortless on the surface often hides a structure built on pressure, restraint, and choices made out of necessity rather than desire. When people look at Heughan and Caitriona Balfe, they see chemistry, comfort, and something that feels emotionally charged. What they rarely consider is how carefully that image has been maintained. For a long time, the narrative felt settled. Two actors, perfectly matched on screen, moving in sync through years of shared work. Interviews reinforced the idea of natural understanding, of a bond that required no explanation. The consistency was reassuring, and reassurance easily becomes belief. But beneath that belief were details most people chose not to question. Certain topics were avoided with remarkable precision. Answers were warm but contained, revealing just enough to satisfy curiosity while closing the door on deeper interpretation. Over time, those patterns stopped being accidental. What made the situation unusual was not secrecy, but discipline. Both Sam and Caitriona demonstrated an ability to hold the same line across years, despite constant pressure to deviate from it. That level of control does not happen without reason. It suggests awareness, and perhaps caution. The more closely observers looked, the more they noticed what was missing. Not affection, not respect, but spontaneity. Moments that seemed candid were still carefully framed. Laughter felt genuine, yet rarely crossed into unpredictability. Fans often mistake consistency for intimacy. When something looks stable for long enough, it is easy to assume it is unguarded. In reality, stability can also be the result of strict boundaries held in place to prevent misunderstanding. The difference is subtle, but important. There were moments that fueled speculation rather than calmed it. A pause before answering certain questions. A shift in tone when conversations drifted too close to personal territory. These were not signs of conflict, but of awareness that some lines should not be crossed. The pressure surrounding their partnership grew heavier with time. What began as appreciation turned into expectation, and expectation turned into demand. Every interaction was analyzed, replayed, and interpreted far beyond its original intent. In that environment, even neutrality becomes a risk. Neither Sam nor Caitriona appeared comfortable feeding into that dynamic indefinitely. The solution was not confrontation, but containment. By maintaining a consistent, professional distance, they could protect both their work and their personal lives. That choice, however, created a new illusion. The shocking part is not that something was hidden. It is that what was hidden was not scandal, but strategy. A shared understanding that some narratives, once unleashed, cannot be controlled. Choosing restraint was less about denial and more about survival. Over time, subtle changes became more noticeable. Interviews focused increasingly on individual journeys rather than shared history. Public interactions grew more measured. Nothing dramatic happened, yet everything felt slightly different. This evolution confused audiences who had invested emotionally in a particular version of the story. When that version stopped being reinforced, uncertainty took its place. People began asking questions that had never felt necessary before. The truth behind it all starts to take shape here. What looked like mystery was often management. What felt like distance was sometimes protection. And what fans interpreted as tension may have been the result of too much attention, not too little connection. By the end of this first examination, one thing becomes clear. The bond between Heughan and Caitriona Balfe was never as simple as it appeared, nor as dramatic as some imagined. It existed within constraints shaped by fame, expectation, and the need for control. The shock, then, is not in discovering a hidden romance or a secret fallout. It is in realizing how much effort goes into keeping a story from becoming something it was never meant to be. And once that realization settles in, the questions only begin to deepen. As this perspective settles in, the story begins to look less dramatic and far more revealing. What many assumed to be tension or secrecy starts to resemble something more deliberate. For Heughan and Caitriona Balfe, consistency was never about performance, but about control. Control over a narrative that could easily spiral beyond their reach. The longer their partnership lasted, the heavier the expectations became. Fans did not just admire their chemistry, they demanded meaning from it. Every glance was examined, every word weighed, every silence questioned. In that environment, even honesty can become dangerous if it fuels the wrong interpretation. What many failed to recognize was how fame changes the rules of connection. Familiarity in private does not translate safely into public expression. When millions feel entitled to interpret your relationship, distance becomes a form of protection rather than rejection. Pulling back is sometimes the only way to preserve what remains intact. This is where the shocking truth quietly emerges. There was no hidden betrayal, no secret romance waiting to be exposed. Instead, there was a shared decision to maintain boundaries strong enough to withstand years of projection. The shock lies in how unromantic that truth feels compared to the fantasy built around it. Observers began to notice how both actors spoke about responsibility rather than emotion when discussing their work together. The language shifted subtly toward professionalism, mutual respect, and longevity. These are not the words of people hiding something explosive. They are the words of people trying to keep something from being misunderstood. The absence of dramatic revelation frustrated some fans, but it also clarified the situation. Not every compelling dynamic is fueled by passion or conflict. Some are sustained by discipline, restraint, and an understanding of what must remain unsaid. That reality is harder to romanticize, but far more realistic. There is also the matter of timing. As both Sam and Caitriona moved into new phases of their lives, the need for clear separation between work and identity grew stronger. What once felt safe to share no longer did. Evolution, not rupture, explains much of what people misread as distance. When viewed through this lens, moments of silence take on new meaning. They are not evasive, but intentional. Silence becomes a statement that says, "This is where the line is drawn." And lines, once drawn, are not meant to be crossed for entertainment. The collective realization is uncomfortable. Fans must confront the idea that their interpretations may have been shaped more by desire than by reality. That realization can feel like loss, even when nothing has actually been taken away. The story simply becomes less fantastical and more human. What remains between Sam Heughan and Caitriona Balfe is something quieter and sturdier than rumor. A professional bond tested by time, attention, and expectation. One that survived precisely because it was managed carefully rather than indulged publicly. By the end, the shocking truth is not a secret uncovered, but a misunderstanding corrected. The drama was never in their relationship, but in the way it was viewed. Once that perspective shifts, the mystery dissolves into clarity. And perhaps that clarity is the hardest part to accept. Not because it disappoints, but because it reminds us how easily we project meaning where boundaries exist. In stripping away illusion, the story does not collapse. It settles, firmly and quietly, into something far more believable. In many ways, this story says more about the audience than the people at its center. The desire to uncover something shocking often blinds viewers to quieter truths. Boundaries are mistaken for secrets, and restraint is confused with distance. That misunderstanding has shaped the narrative for far too long. What remains now is a clearer picture of Sam Heughan and Caitriona Balfe as professionals who chose longevity over spectacle. Their connection was never meant to satisfy curiosity, only to serve the work. And once that is understood, the so-called shocking truth no longer feels explosive. It feels inevitable.